Welcome to the Purpose Driven Mom Show, episode 400. Wow, 400! I cannot believe it. I was getting ready to record today and I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the podcast journey, and I'm going to give you some lessons, some tips. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, what I've learned in 400 episodes, 575,000 downloads. It is so exciting to get to say that. Because if I went back to 2019 when we started our podcast, I did not think we were going to still be here. And I want to tell you a little bit of our origin story and encourage you today. Because if you've been someone who's been thinking, I want to do a podcast, I don't know where to get started, um, let this be your catalyst, right? Like, let this be the thing that tells you why podcasting and why your podcast matters. So, I love podcasting. I think it is a fabulous platform. I like it because I was a podcast listener. And I think for a lot of us, podcasts, especially for moms, throw an AirPod in and do your thing, right? I can learn and listen and grow and do my thing with a podcast better than with a book, better than watching, a video or taking a course. And if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I'm going to encourage it, because if you want to reach out to people, this is a great place to get. This is the place where people are. And a podcast is really an incredible content source because you can repurpose up the wazoo. We just started this year getting up on YouTube. It's a new one for us. So we now are on YouTube. We take these videos, strip the audio, do that. And then I just told my podcast editor, I was like, well, get me some transcripts. We can get some blog posts going, right? You can make it into different forms of content, and you can just serve people in a different way. In 2019, I wanted to start a podcast, and I thought about it for a while. I actually thought about it since 2018, in like the early podcasting days. I thought, I want to do this. Why? Because I liked podcasts. I like to listen to them. And I thought, I can do this. I can start a podcast. But I put it off and I put it off and I put it off. And then finally in 2019, I made it my goal and I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start a podcast, and whatever happens, happens. I took a podcasting course that kind of told me the basics of, like microphones and editing softwares and all those sort of things. And I just hit record. When I started the Purpose of Mom podcast in May of 2019, I didn't know what I was getting in for. I didn't know what I was going to talk about. At that point, I was still a lifestyle mom blogger. That's how I started my journey. I was talking about all things from meal planning to budgeting to healthy habits because I was coming out of my network marketing business. I mean, there really wasn't a flow with productivity, with goal setting, with all the things that I do now. And I remember feeling so nervous that very first episode. Is anyone going to listen? What if people listen? And it all worked out fine. Along the way, we decided to start to go to two episodes. Two episodes a week meant more downloads, but it meant more content. And so, because of that, I was really working hard to get this content up there, to start to record the podcast. And it allowed us to reach more people. Now, in the beginning of my podcast, I did it all myself up until 2020. So that first year was all me editing, show notes. I did all of it until I met my incredible podcast manager and editor, Sharon, who's been with Team APGM from the beginning. I get emotional thinking about the evolution and the journey, my stuff that she puts up with all the time. She really helped us create, she's one of my first hires, helped us create systems in the business, get organized, and really take the podcast to the next level. And so I just want to shout her out. Sharon, do not cut this out. I just want to shout her out really quickly. And actually, Sharon has a really cool jumpstart kind of podcaster course. So Sharon, I want you to link that up in the show notes if anybody else is thinking about podcasting. So if people are interested, they can come jump over and check out your mini course on getting the podcast started. When I was doing the editing and all of it by myself, it was really hard. There was a lot of stuff that I had to do. And so investing in somebody to do it for me was scary because I wasn't making that much money, but I knew that it would give me my time back. And so once Sharon came on board, we were able to really streamline what we do. We have a very good flow that we get off course. We get on course. Today is a podcast batching day. This is the fourth episode that I'm recording in a day. We'll talk about batching in a little bit. And there are times when I'm super behind and times after today's episode where I'm back on track. But we've created systems, we've created flows And now we are at the point where we actually went back down to one episode a week because of just, I couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep pumping out the content at the rate while I worked on other projects. So I made that decision and we're still going strong. 575,000 downloads is nothing to shy away from celebrating. So whether this is the first episode you've heard of ours or you've been here OG from the beginning, thank you so much. I know that this podcast reaches lots of people. I know that it actually is helping moms. It's one of those things that I just love to do because I know that it makes a difference. There's some days that are really tough in the business when you have your own business, especially year six, like some days are so hard, you just want to burn it all to the ground. But then I remember the podcast and we know a lot of people come into our programs from this podcast. A podcast is where we get to be friends. It's where we get to hang out. And if you go back to the beginning episodes, they probably sound very different from these because in the beginning, I was writing almost an entire outline, practically a blog post out, and reading it. I wasn't doing any videos, so I was just reading it. So they sounded kind of formulaic, things like that. Here, if you're on YouTube, you can see I've got a sticky note of an outline with my messy handwriting with three things that I'll stick on my screen. And I'm just riffing. I'm just going to talk with you because I firmly believe this should be a conversational podcast. It's my vibe. It's what I like. I want it to feel like we're hanging out. And yeah, I'm still going to give you the tips. So we're going to get to that in a second. But I just want to pause and say thank you. Thank you. If you have a second today, head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen. Or if you're on YouTube, give us the 5-star rating, write a great review for us underneath the video as a anniversary podcasting 400 episode gift. I would love that and appreciate it. So let's get to the lessons. Let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to if you're starting a podcast. If I was to start from the beginning 400 episodes ago, what would I talk about, right? What would I do? How would I figure it out? Here are the lessons. First things first, consistency. I want you to decide what consistency is going to look like in your podcast and stick with it. One of the reasons that the Purpose Driven Mom Show is one of the top podcasts for moms, top 1% podcast in the world in this category is because of consistency. But consistent doesn't mean constant. I just did a interview for the summit. We aired it on the podcast with Elizabeth Stapleton. She said this and I loved it. Consistency isn't constant. I want you to choose where you want to start. So for a while, we chose 1 time a week. That worked for us. Consistency moved to 2 times a week. Now we're back to 1 time a week. Maybe it's once a month. Maybe it's twice a month. I want you to pick it and commit no matter what and start small. If you're not ready to jump all the way in, can you start with 1 episode a month? I'm going to do 1 episode a month for this quarter. That's 3 episodes. And then at the end of the quarter, I want you to reevaluate and ask yourself, can I do more? Am I at capacity to add a second episode? And if you are, go for it. I do recommend a weekly show. I think it's good for downloads. It's good for content, things like that. Good for your people. They get used to your show, but whatever works for you. Start small, but let it be constant. Or I'm sorry, let it be consistent, not constant. So if once a month is where you're at, try that for 3 months. Give that a go and stick with it. The reason there are so many podcasts out there and not that many successful ones is because people stop. It's because things get hard, they stop, they don't keep going. There were times in our 400 episodes where we had no episode, maybe twice at the most. And that happens. I was sick or something and I couldn't get it back on. And we just said, you know what, we're just not going to have an episode this week. It didn't mean I was a failure. It just meant that I needed to take a break. But don't let that be the norm. The longer you take of pausing in between recording your episodes, the harder it's going to be to get back on. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about creating consistent work schedules. I do recommend you have 1 podcast, like time block a week where you're working on podcasts. Now, today I did a batch day. My whole day was podcast focused. My goal was to get 4 episodes done because I needed to get ahead so that we can get back on track. So you don't have to do 4 episodes in a row, but can you do more than 1? Can you batch together? I highly recommend the batching. When I'm in the mood to record, I'm like, cool, let me record. Now today's the day, like I am doing the YouTube videos. I'm not always like the most camera ready. Like I put makeup on this morning. I did not wash my hair. It's pretty greasy. It's pretty thrown back. But I'm at the point in my own confidence in my own journey that like I'm okay with it. Like I don't need to always have my hair curled and like tons of makeup on. Now, if you probably go back and watch 4 episodes ago, my makeup looked a lot fresher earlier in the morning, but I'm okay with it. If I let the fact that my makeup has faded stop me from putting out something that could help you and let it get in the way, I wouldn't be happy with that. So don't feel like it has to be perfect, but it is helpful if you have a recording day because then you're like, all right, cool, my hair is done, my makeup's done, I'm like a little bit more put together and I can get it done. And also when you're in the mood, like I'm in a flow. I've been on, I mean, I'm tired, I'm not gonna lie. I had 4 episodes that I did, plus I did my coaching call for my program, plus I did a little couple extra work things today. So I've been on camera talking for hours today. So I am tired, but I'm in a better flow. I'm not feeling like I'm struggling to come up with words. I'm just kind of, like I said, just riffing off my outline. When you're stop and starting, it becomes harder. So if you can do 2 episodes in a row, by the time you get to that second episode, it's going to feel a lot more conversational. It's going to feel a lot more fun, and you can batch it out. I really recommend you have a podcast day. Try to make it consistent every Thursday. I'm going to work on my podcast because then you at least know when it's going to get done. Then you can batch together your recording. You can batch together your editing. You can batch together your show notes, your images. I do recommend that you take a break between recording and editing. One of the things that's going to be really helpful is walking away from it for a bit. Because if I went right in, when I was doing it by myself, I went right into record editing right from recording, I would rip the whole thing apart. I would hear every little I would want to re-record the whole thing. So I just take a break. I just take a little break and go back at it. And then the other just quick little tip for my new podcasters, do not edit as you record. Record the whole thing all the way through. If you need to stop, Sharon gives me this tip. She says stop and then pause for a little bit because then you can clearly see the wave lines of where you need to jump in and edit later. In the beginning, I was editing as I went. I would stop, I would pause, I would cut things out, I would listen back, and it would take me absolutely forever. So go ahead and batch on your podcast day. If you can't get a podcast day, I understand that, or like a podcast time block or whatever, but try to keep it consistent. You want to have this be your weekly content source. So once a week, you need to have podcast work time. If not, it's going to be very easy to get thrown off. It's going to be very easy to just not get episodes recorded. So schedule yourself once a weekend for the podcast. It's how I've shown up for 400 episodes and been able to do it. Now we talk about batching. I want to talk a little bit about topics and how you can work smarter, not harder. One of the easiest things I find is coming up with what to talk about because I ask my people, literally, I'm going to show you a sticky note today. If you're on YouTube, you can see it. It says passive versus active work days. And again, my terrible handwriting here. I just got off a coaching call with members of the Purpose Driven Mom Club. And we were talking about this topic of having passive versus active work days. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. And I wrote it down because episode 401 is probably going to be on passive and active work days. I get the ideas from my people. One of the things that I'm constantly doing is making a list of things that my people are asking, things that they're saying, questions that I'm getting. Why? Because if they're getting it, that's easy content to create. And if they're asking it, then that means they want to know. And that means other people want to know. And then I can be the expert in that area. So have a spreadsheet, have a Trello board, have a place where you're kind of crowdsourcing information. And in your Facebook, we have a question when you come into our Facebook group. What's your biggest struggle with time management and productivity? When we let people into the group, we copy their answers and put them on our spreadsheet. When I go to plan out the content for the next month, I look at that spreadsheet and I'm like, oh, look, I noticed 5 people said they're feeling overwhelmed because, let's see, this is March when this is airing, because spring break is coming and they're not sure how to plan. Great. I'm going to do an episode on planning your spring break or things like that. This way, I'm answering the question that my moms need. I'm not just making up stuff because I think it'd be fun to talk about. I'm helping them. This is one of the reasons why the show, I think, does so well. We don't do much promotion of it. We send an email out to our email list, but that is it. Once a week, we send an email, we have an episode. But it gets shared a lot. And it gets shared a lot because I think the content is helping people. And people are like, oh, I'm listening to this episode. This really helped me out. I'm going to share it with my mom friend. So when you're getting into doing your content for your podcast, ask people what they want. We've gotten this question from my business entrepreneurial moms that hang out. Like, I want to start a podcast and I don't know what to do. Let me answer your question today, right? Let me tell you what to do. All right. And then I think my last quick tip here on today's episode is just it's okay to change. It's okay to flop. It's okay if one episode gets more downloads than another. It's okay if an episode gets little to no downloads. It's okay if you do a topic and you feel like it was clunky or if it didn't feel natural. It's okay to change what you talk about. Again, if you go back to the beginning, I've got episodes on meal planning and budgeting and things like that. I don't talk about those topics anymore. Why? Because I don't want to, and that's fine as well. I guess a bonus tip, I was just thinking too about style and things like that is do interviews if you can. I know I don't do as many interviews as I used to, but I'm so thankful that I did in the beginning. I prefer solo episodes because of this, because I just want to hang out with you, right? I want to talk to you. I want it to be conversational. I want to have a nice time with my friend on the podcast. I love to do interviews though and meet new people, but it doesn't always work in my schedule. So we don't do as many. But in the beginning, we did a lot. We had one interview episode a week. Why do I recommend at least one a month, one every 4 episodes you do be an interview? Collaboration. I wish I had collaborated more and more in the beginning. Now that we're on getting ready for our next year, 7th year of the Purpose Driven Mom Summit, it's easy. I'm like, oh, who do I want to talk? These are the people I've worked with. I get pitched every single day to be on someone's podcast, or people want to come on our podcast. We get pitched to speak at summits and at events. Why? Because our podcast has gotten around and because I've done interviews with people. I brought really good, valuable guests. Some guests, honestly, weren't good fits. They weren't it, but we kept moving. We tried it and it wasn't a fit. We knew what kind of content people liked. And it was a great source of collaboration. Now, don't do interviews because you're like, oh, if I interview Cara and then Cara shares it, I'm going to get a million downloads. Don't depend on somebody else to do your marketing. Now, sometimes that happens where people will share and it works out, but sometimes it doesn't. Do the interviews because one, it'll bring value to your people, but two, it's really great collaboration for you. And that's the long game here with podcasting. Listen, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of the APDM network. Thank you for listening to the show, episode 400 today. Share an episode with a friend. Please go leave a review today. And if you are thinking of starting a podcast, please do it. The world needs your show. I don't care if there are 3,000 other shows that are like yours. The world needs what you have to offer. You can go to purposedrivenmom.com/podcast 400. Here are the show notes. Check out Sharon's course. Get started on your podcast and have a fabulous day.